All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and our latest RBT practice exam, where we're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. After passing your behavior technician exam, you get a job working with children with autism. Your supervisor tells you that your first client does engage in aggressive behavior, but that you will have support. What should be in the client's treatment plan prior to you starting the case? Now, depending on who you work with, where you work, you might occasionally encounter clients who are aggressive, who can do harm to you, to somebody else, to the environment. And in those cases, we always want to keep the client safe first and foremost, but we need to have a plan. So in this case, your supervisor tells you that your first client does engage in aggressive behavior. You will have support, which is great, but there's something else that needs to be written in the treatment plan prior to you starting the case. And if it isn't, you need to be sure it is before you go out and give services. So, what needs to be in the treatment plan if you know for sure your client will engage in potentially harmful behaviors? A DRO procedure. So a DRO procedure would be differential reinforcement of other behaviors, and that's going to be very client specific. Okay, we're talking in general about a client who engages in aggressive behavior. This isn't a specific intervention. It's something on our task list in general. So B, a crisis emergency plan, is really what we're looking for. The crisis emergency plan tells you how you need to respond in case there's a situation where potential harm could come upon the client, you, or somebody else. If that is not in the treatment plan, then you need to make sure it is before you go any further. B or C, an extinction procedure, it's the same thing as DRO. It's going to be very client specific, and it depends on how your supervisor plans to handle the behavior. In general, if we have an aggressive client, everybody needs a crisis emergency plan. And then D, a parent training intervention. That's not specific to this behavior. That's going to be up to the supervisor's discretion. What isn't and what is required is a crisis emergency plan in any situation where you have a client or something else that could cause you, the client, or somebody else harm. You need a crisis emergency plan to tell you how to respond. Every night before you get ready for bed, you make yourself some tea in your tea kettle. The tea helps take away your stress at the end of the day, and you've been doing this for months. The consequence of taking away your stress is what? So that's very important how they phrased this last part. The consequence of taking away your stress. So we're looking at taking away stress. And in antecedent behavior consequence questions, we need to be very smart about identifying the actual antecedents, behaviors, and the consequences. So we know before you get ready for bed, you make yourself some tea, and the tea takes away your stress. So the antecedent is you're getting ready for bed. The response is you make yourself some tea. The consequence is your stress goes away. Now, the key word there is take away. So immediately, what do you think when you hear take away? Well, you should think negative. Because remember, negative is removal, positive is adding. If we're taking something away, it's going to be negative. So immediately we know this is some sort of negative consequence. So we can eliminate A and we can eliminate B. So we're looking at C, we're looking at D. So socially mediated versus automatic. What is the difference? Socially mediated, there's a second person involved. There's another party involved. There's somebody else involved. Automatic, it's essentially means alone or not given by somebody else. So the consequence is a result of your own actions and your own actions alone. Nobody else provided the consequence for you. In this case, you're acting alone. You're getting ready for bed. You're making yourself some tea. The tea takes away your stress. There's nobody else involved. Not like somebody else made the tea for you. It's not somebody else helped you relax. Simply, you made the tea. Tea took away your stress. Therefore, it's going to be automatic negative reinforcement. So how do we get that? Automatic, because by yourself, there's not a second party. Negative, we're taking it away. And then reinforcement, because you've been doing this for months. The consequence has maintained or increased your behavior in the future. A typical session with David goes smoothly, and you enjoy being at David's house and around David. Today, however, David engages in an intense sequence of behavior that you have never seen before. What should be your first priority in this situation? All right, this is kind of along the same lines of question one when we talked about aggression, but in this case, it's a brand new behavior. So usually everything is going smoothly. And this is some of the hardest cases when, in general, things are great. And then out of nowhere, you see this uncharacteristic behavior, right? So today, David engages in an intense behavior you've never seen before. The question is asking, what is your first priority? So there's different things you need to do to respond. The question wants to know, what is your first priority? What is your number one priority in this situation? A, identify the topography. Well, the topography is probably going to be pretty easy to identify, but it's never going to be your first priority in the situation, no matter what. Because even if this other one isn't your first priority, you're still going to want to try to identify the function before topography, because function is just going to be much more important. So B, identify the function. Very important. We're talking ultimate, first, above all else, priority. If we look at C, keep the client safe, that's what we're referring to. Our number one job is do no harm. We have to keep the client safe at all times. Now, when a new behavior emerges, you want to do your best to avoid giving it too much attention, to avoid inadvertently reinforcing it. However, whatever you need to do to keep the client safe, that is your number one priority. Once the client is safe, we can start looking for functions. Once we find functions, we can start talking about topography. It's a sequence of events. Number one thing, client safe. D, report the behavior to your supervisor. Also extremely important. But before you go and start texting or calling your supervisor, you've got to make sure everybody's okay. That's part of a crisis emergency reaction. If you see new intense behaviors you've never seen before, number one thing is keeping the client safe. Then we can report it. Then we can identify the function. Then we can identify topography. But before we do that, everybody has to be safe. You tell your client to touch their nose, clap their hands, and then run to the door and back. Client successfully does all three in a row, and you give them a token. What best describes this scenario? All right, so we're describing the scenario. What is the scenario? Well, you tell your client, touch your nose. You tell them, clap their hands. You tell them, run to the door and back. The client does all three. So we're talking in general about the scenario. And you can see it doesn't specify your behavior, client behavior. It just says, in general, what best describes this scenario. So A, expressive instructions. What's the difference between expressive and receptive? Expressive deals with communication, so language and vocal and verbal behavior. Receptive deals with following instructions, following directions. So what are we doing here? You are giving directions, client is following them. Talking communication here. We're simply talking listening, following directions, receptive instructions. And then you have this listener behavior. What is listener behavior? So in the most recent version of the Cooper book, which is the white book, which you might have seen, listener behavior is the more modern way to refer to receptive instructions, because listener behavior is simply a listener listening to what a speaker is saying and doing it, right? So the client is the listener in the situation. You're the speaker. The client is hearing what you're saying, and they're acting accordingly. What best describes the scenario? Well, you're giving receptive instructions, right? Touch nose, clap hands, run to door. The listener is listening. They're engaging in listener behavior. So the answer is going to be both B and C. A shaping procedure is currently in progress for the target behavior of holding a pencil correctly. Client has been gripping the pencil with a full fist for 3 weeks and is receiving reinforcement. What should be done next in the shaping procedure? So we're working with shaping procedures here. And how do shaping procedures work? Well, we reinforce successive approximations of behavior until we reach a terminal behavior. In other words, I have a target behavior, which is my terminal behavior. And as the client engages responses that are closer and closer, I reinforce and reinforce and reinforce. And the key is we want to keep that moving, right? So if you reinforce the same approximation for too long a time, you're never moving the client closer to the actual behavior. So we need to be careful about that. In this case, we have a shaping procedure for holding a pencil correctly. Client's gripping the pencil with a full fist for 3 weeks. and is receiving reinforcement. So the full fist is an approximation, right? They're holding the pencil. Now we need to get it a little closer. However, we've been reinforcing this behavior for 3 full weeks. What do we do next to make sure shaping is effective? A, provide reinforcement for the next approximation of holding a pencil. Yeah, absolutely, right? We've been doing it for 3 weeks. If we continue to do it, we're only going to strengthen this gripping the pencil with a full fist. We need to start advancing this client a little bit. B, thicken the schedule of reinforcement for gripping the pencil with a full fist. Well, if we thicken the schedule, what does that mean? Well, it means we're going to be providing more reinforcement for the full fist grip. And we don't want to do that, right? We need to start advancing them. Remember, thickening the schedule is the opposite of fading or thinning the schedule. Thickening is going to be more reinforcement. C, reinforce the full fist grip on a continuous schedule. That's going to be even worse. That means every time they grip the pencil with a full fist, we're going to deliver reinforcement. Again, we don't want to strengthen full fist because that's not our terminal behavior. It's a stepping stone to getting the full behavior. But now, instead of continuing to reinforce this behavior, we need to find the next approximation and try to get reinforcement for the next approximation. That's the whole idea behind shaping. We get closer and closer to the target terminal behavior, and then we can reinforce that final behavior. A behavior technician attends an initial assessment with their supervising behavior analyst. The behavior analyst asks the technician to record everything that happens before and after the client engages in hand flapping. The technician is using what kind of measurement? Now, what's the giveaway here? A lot of times in the question, there's going to be a dead giveaway. People miss it because they try to read too quickly. Let's slow down. Attending an initial assessment, the analyst asks the technician to record everything that happens before and after the client engages in hand flapping. And that's the key. If I'm in recording what happens before, what happens after the client engages in hand flapping, recording. A, frequency. Do we talk about count at all? Are we talking about any sort of behavioral count here? No, there's no mention of frequency, no mention of count. B, ABC recording. Antecedent, behavior, consequence. Recording what happens before, what happens after the behavior. Okay. ABC recording sounds pretty good. What about B, duration? Because we always read all of our answer choices. We're not talking about the length of the behavior. And then D, indirect. Well, we have to, in order to record everything that happens before and after the client engages in hand flapping, we have to directly observe the client. So we can't be doing indirect observation. Since we're recording everything that happens before and everything that happens after, we are talking about ABC recording. You've been using small gestural prompts for a week and a half to get your client to throw their food away in the trash can after they are done eating. What is the current SD for throwing away food? Now, this is not the easiest question in the world, okay? You've got to know a lot of different things about SDs and prompts and whatnot. One thing to remember about prompting is when you use a prompt, the prompt becomes the temporary SD. Think about it. If I say touch your nose, and then I physically prompt you to touch your nose, and you touch your nose, well, what happened right before you touched your nose? I prompted you. So the reason we fade prompts is because they are temporary SDs. So if you've been using small gestural prompts for a week to get your client to throw their food away after they're done eating, what is the current SD? Well, think about it like this. If you said, throw away your food, and then you gestured, and they threw away your food, what was the SD? It's a gesture. So the prompt becomes a temporary SD until you fade it. So in this case, what's the current SD? A, you telling the client to throw away the food. Well, you're using a prompt. So you tell the client to throw away the food, then you prompt, then they respond. The prompt is the SD. So the gestural prompts are the SD. The client finishing their food. Maybe you didn't even tell the client to throw away their food. Even so, since you're prompting, the prompt is becoming the SD. We have to get rid of the prompts to make sure there's a true natural SD in place because we want the client finishing their food to be the SD. We even want someone to telling the client to throw away their food to be the SD. We don't want the prompt to be always the SD. We need to fade it out and transfer control to a different SD. But the current SD is going to be the gestural prompts. That's more of a technical question, okay? There's a lot of different ideas going on in there. Make sure you understand why a prompt becomes a temporary SD. 2 children are told to make their bed in the morning while their mom prepares them breakfast. Mom keeps track of who makes their bed and who doesn't, and then rewards them at the end of the week based on the data she collected. What is the simplest explanation for how the mom can collect data on bed making while preparing breakfast? It's a long question, isn't a hard question. Break it down. Simplest explanation, how the mom can collect data on bed making while also preparing breakfast. So the key here is simplest explanation. So, two children, both make their bed in the morning, mom prepares breakfast. The mom somehow keeps track of who makes their bed and who doesn't and rewards them. How can she do at the same time, right? She's making breakfast and she's also recording who makes their bed. And remember, we want the simplest explanation, which is also known as parsimony. A, the mom is using cameras to watch the children make their bed. Possibly. Is there a simpler explanation? B, the mom is observing the children in between preparing breakfast. Again, quite possibly. Is there an even simpler explanation? Think about what type of measurement she could use. C, the mom is measuring the product of bed making behavior. Yeah, why not? She doesn't have to watch them make their bed. The bed's either made or it isn't. That's one of the advantages of permanent product. Whatever your behavior produces, I can go and look at. I don't have to actually be there watching you do it. That's much simpler than saying, well, she's using cameras or she's observing the children when there's no indication of that. Simplest way would just be permanent product. Yes, you made your bed. No, you didn't. D, the mom's not taking accurate data on bed making. There's nothing to imply that. Simplest explanation is she's using permanent product data collection. So the mom is measuring the product of the bed making behavior. Great. Make sure you check out btexamreview.com. Subscribe. Let us know when you pass. Work hard. Study hard. See you soon.